The emergency beacon cut through the silence of space like a knife through silk, its desperate signal reaching the human deep space monitoring station Prometheus 7. Captain Sarah Chun studied the alien transmission with growing concern, her weathered face reflecting the blue glow of the holographic display. The message was fragmentary, corrupted by distance and interference, but the universal distress codes were unmistakable. "Commander, we're picking up a Class 7 emergency signal from the Kepler 442 system," reported Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez from the communications console. "It's definitely alien in origin, using Galactic Federation standard protocols." Chun straightened in her command chair, her military training kicking in despite the extraordinary circumstances. Humanity had only recently made contact with the Galactic Federation, a loose alliance of over 300 alien species that govern trade and diplomacy across this arm of the galaxy. Earth was still considered a probationary member, barely tolerated by most species who viewed humans with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "How far out is Kepler 442? Chen asked, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. "Approximately 47 light years, ma'am. At maximum FDL capability, we're looking at a 6-day journey for our fastest ship." Chen's jaw tightened. The newly commissioned UES Defiance was their most advanced vessel, equipped with experimental drive systems that pushed the boundaries of human engineering. But even their best technology paled in comparison to what the older Federation species possessed. "What do we know about that system? Any Federation presence?" Rodriguez's fingers danced across his console, pulling up stellar cartography data. "Kepler 442 is listed as a protected archaeological site, home to the Zephyrian civilization until their extinction approximately 2,000 years ago. Current inhabitants are the Villani, a peaceful research species studying the ruins. Population roughly 50,000. The distress signal crackled again through the speakers, and this time, Chen could make out fragments of actual communication. The translator system struggled with a rapid, high-pitched Villani language, but keywords emerged: attack, unknown aggressors, civilian casualties, requesting immediate assistance. "Ma'am," Rodriguez continued, his voice heavy with implications, "according to our database, the nearest Federation response fleet is stationed at the Arcturus Nexus. That's over 90 light years from Kepler 442. Even if they dispatched immediately, they wouldn't arrive for at least 2 weeks." Chun stood and walked to the main viewport, staring out at the star field beyond. Earth's position on the galactic rim meant they were often closer to frontier systems than the core Federation worlds, but that geographical advantage came with political complications. Most alien species still viewed humans as dangerous primitives, their warlike nature and rapid technological advancement making older civilizations nervous. The Federation had made their position clear during humanity's integration process. Earth species was classified as Deathworld Adapted, a designation that carried significant stigma. Most Federation species evolved on worlds with stable climates, minimal predation, and abundant resources. They couldn't comprehend how humans had survived and thrived on a planet where everything from the weather to the wildlife seemed designed to kill them. "Commander, we're receiving additional transmissions," Rodriguez announced urgently. "The situation appears to be deteriorating rapidly. I'm detecting weapon signatures consistent with military-grade plasma cannons and fusion warheads." Chen's blood ran cold. The Villani were known throughout the Federation as peaceful researchers, their entire culture built around scholarly pursuit and historical preservation. They had no military to speak of, relying on Federation protection and the general respect their work commanded throughout civilized space. "Who would attack an archaeological colony?" she wondered aloud. "Unknown, ma'am. But whoever they are, they're not holding back. The energy readings suggest orbital bombardment of major population centers." The moral calculus was simple, even if the political implications were staggering. 50,000 innocent beings were under attack, and humanity was the only force capable of reaching them in time. The fact that most of the galaxy viewed humans as barely controlled savages was irrelevant in the face of such clear need. Chin turned back to her crew, seeing her own determination reflected in their faces. These were soldiers and explorers who had volunteered for deep space duty specifically because they wanted to prove humanity's worth to the broader galactic community. The opportunity to demonstrate human compassion and courage wouldn't come again anytime soon. Open a channel to Admiral Morrison at Fleet Command, Chen ordered. Priority Alpha classification. The holographic display shimmered, resolving into the stern features of Admiral James Morrison, his gray beard and lined face speaking to decades of service. Behind him, Chen could see the bustling activity of Earth's primary military command center. Admiral, we have a situation, Chen began without preamble, quickly outlining the distress signal and their analysis of the tactical situation. Morrison listened without interruption, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. When Chen finished, he was quiet for several long moments, clearly weighing the same factors she had considered. Captain, you understand what you're proposing, Morrison said finally. Deploying human forces to intervene in what amounts to an alien conflict, without Federation authorization or support. If this goes badly, it could set back our integration by decades. With respect, Admiral, if we stand by and do nothing while 50,000 civilians are slaughtered, what does that say about human character? Isn't this exactly the kind of situation where our values should guide our actions? Morrison nodded slowly, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. My thoughts exactly, Captain. You have authorization to deploy immediately. Take the Defiance and whatever support vessels you deem necessary. And Chen, show them what humans are really made of. The connection terminated, leaving Chen alone with her crew and the weight of command. She turned to Rodriguez, who was already pulling up deployment schedules and ship manifests. Contact the Defiance. Tell Commander Nakamura to prep for immediate departure. I want full battle load and every available Marine unit aboard within 6 hours. Yes, ma'am. What about our other ships? Chen considered the question carefully. The UES Valkyrie and UES Thor were both in-system, smaller destroyer-class vessels that could make the journey, but would be limited in their effectiveness. However, every additional ship meant more firepower and more options in an unknown tactical situation. Bring them both. And contact the merchant vessel Prosperity. She's got a belter crew with combat experience. See if they're willing to volunteer for a humanitarian mission. As her orders were implemented throughout the station, Chun found herself thinking about the broader implications of their mission. Humanity's integration into the Galactic Federation had been challenging from the beginning. Most alien species had evolved from prey animals or developed on worlds where cooperation was the primary survival strategy. They found human behavioral patterns disturbing and unpredictable. The classification as a Death World species carried heavy baggage. It meant humans were viewed as inherently violent, prone to aggression, and dangerously adaptable. Federation psychologists had written extensively about humanity's unusual capacity for both creative problem-solving and devastating warfare, often expressing concern about what would happen when such a species gained access to galactic-level technology. But those same traits that made other species nervous might be exactly what the Villani needed right now. Human tactical doctrine emphasized speed, aggression, and overwhelming force applied at decisive moments, while Federation species prefer negotiation and measured response. Humans were willing to act quickly when civilian lives were at stake. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation and coordination. Chun transferred her flag to the Defiance, a sleek battlecruiser that represented the pinnacle of human military engineering. The ship's fusion drives could push her to nearly 60% of light speed, while her weapon systems included both human-designed kinetic cannons and adapted alien plasma technology. Commander Hiroshi Nakamura met her at the airlock, his crisp uniform and alert demeanor reflecting the urgency of their mission. As they walked toward the bridge, he briefed her on their status and crew readiness. We've got full ammunition loads and provisions for 3 weeks of independent operation, Nakamura reported. The Marine contingent is led by Colonel Martinez, 200 of our best, equipped for both ship-to-ship combat and planetary operations. What about intelligence on our potential adversaries? Nakamura's expression darkened. That's where things get complicated, Captain. We've been monitoring communications traffic throughout the region, and there are indications this might not be a random pirate raid. The attack patterns suggest military precision and coordination. Chun felt a chill of apprehension. Random pirates were one thing. They could be scared off or defeated through superior firepower and tactics. But a coordinated military assault on a protected archaeological site suggested something far more serious. Any idea who might be responsible? Our xenology team has a few theories, none of them good. The most likely candidates are either rogue elements from the Hegemony War trying to destabilize Federation border regions, or worse, one of the client species attempting to curry favor with anti-Federation factions. The Hegemony War had ended nearly 50 years ago, but its aftermath continued to shape galactic politics. A coalition of expansionist species had attempted to overthrow the Federation's democratic structure, leading to a devastating conflict that claimed billions of lives across dozens of worlds. Though the hegemony had been defeated, remnant forces still operated in the outer systems, conducting raids and attempting to recruit new allies. As they reached the bridge, Chun could see her crew making final preparations for departure. The main screen showed a tactical display of their small fleet. 3 human warships and the converted merchant vessel, a force that would have been laughable by Federation standards, but represented the best humanity could deploy on short notice. All stations report ready for departure, announced Lieutenant Commander Singh from the tactical station. Chin settled into the captain's chair, feeling the familiar weight of command settling over her shoulders. In a few minutes, they would enter hyperspace and begin a journey that could fundamentally alter humanity's relationship with the rest of the galaxy. Success might prove that humans deserved full Federation membership and respect. Failure could confirm every negative stereotype about Death World species. All ships, this is defiance, she announced over the fleet communication channel. We're about to embark on a mission that may seem impossible by conventional standards. We're outnumbered, operating without support, and jumping into a situation where the enemy is unknown and the tactical picture is incomplete. She paused, looking around at her bridge crew and seeing the same determination she felt reflected in every face. But we're also doing something that defines who we are as human beings. We're rushing toward danger to protect those who cannot protect themselves. We're proving that humanity's place in this galaxy isn't determined by what others think of us, but by what we're willing to do when it matters most. The acknowledgments came back from all ships, a chorus of voices representing the best of human courage and determination. Shin nodded to her helmsman. All ships, jump in 3, 2 a mark. The stars stretched into brilliant lines as the small human fleet leaped into hyperspace, racing toward a distant world where 50,000 lives hung in the balance. Behind them, automated systems transmitted their mission parameters to Fleet Command and the Federation Emergency Response Council, ensuring that whatever happened in the next few days would be witnessed and judged by both humanity and the galaxy at large. In the quantum realm between normal space and hyperspace, the Defiance and her escorts hurtled toward an unknown enemy and an uncertain fate. Chin stared at the swirling patterns of hyperspace and wondered if they were flying toward humanity's greatest triumph or its most devastating failure. Either way, they would meet it head-on in true human fashion. The Kepler 442 system materialized around them like a vision from hell, where the star charts had promised a peaceful research colony surrounded by ancient ruins and pristine landscapes. The human fleet emerged into a war zone of shocking brutality. Captain Chin's bridge crew fell silent as the tactical displays populated with devastating intelligence. Mother of God, whispered Lieutenant Rodriguez from his communications station, his face pale as he processed the incoming data streams. Before them hung Volani Prime, a world that had been renowned throughout the Federation for its breathtaking beauty and historical significance. The planet's 3 continents were normally visible through swirling clouds of pale blue and silver, dotted with the crystalline spires that house Volani research facilities and the ancient monuments left behind by the mysterious Zephyrian civilization. Now, those same continents glowed with the angry red signatures of massive fires. Orbital debris clouded the upper atmosphere, the remnants of research stations and defensive platforms that had been systematically destroyed. Most horrifying of all were the dark craters that scarred the planetary surface, each one marking the site of a fusion warhead detonation. Tactical assessment, Chen ordered, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. Commander Nakamura's hands flew over his console, compiling data from their sensor sweeps. Captain, we're detecting at least 12 enemy vessels in various orbital positions. Ship classifications are unusual. I'm seeing elements from multiple species, but the command vessel appears to be a modified Crothery heavy cruiser. Chun felt her blood turn to ice. The Crothery were one of the galaxy's most aggressive species, their society built around concepts of dominance and territorial expansion. They had been founding members of the failed hegemony and had spent the decades since that war's end nursing their grievances in the outer systems. Are they aware of our presence? Negative, ma'am. We're maintaining passive sensors only and using the system's asteroid belt for concealment. However, based on their current orbital patterns, they're conducting systematic bombardment of remaining population centers. The main screen shifted to show intercepted communication traffic, with the ship's translation systems working to decode the multiple alien languages being used by the attacking force. What emerged was a picture of coordinated genocide that made Chen's hands clench into fists. They're not just attacking military targets, reported Lieutenant Commander Singh from Tactical. Long-range sensors indicate they're specifically targeting schools, hospitals, and refugee centers. This isn't warfare, it's extermination. Through the bridge's speakers came the faint echo of Volani distress signals, growing weaker by the hour as transmitters were destroyed or abandoned. The peaceful research species had no real concept of military defense, having relied for centuries on Federation protection and the general taboo against attacking archaeological sites. Captain, Rodriguez announced urgently, I'm picking up a strong signal from what appears to be the primary research complex on the southern continent. It's its children, ma'am. Volani younglings are trapped in underground bunkers while the facility above them burns. The bridge fell into grim silence as that information sank in. Chun stood and walked to the main viewport, staring out at the distant world where innocent beings were being systematically murdered while the galaxy's supposed protectors were weeks away from mounting any response. Estimated enemy strength? She asked quietly. Nakamura consulted his displays again. 12 combat vessels as mentioned, ranging from destroyer-class raiders to that Crothery heavy cruiser. Total estimated crew complement around 8,000, with modern weapons and shielding. By conventional Federation doctrine, we need at least a full battle group to engage them directly. And what's our strength? 4 ships, roughly 800 crew and Marines, weapons that are primarily human-designed with limited alien technology integration. Nakamura paused, clearly running calculations in his head. Captain, by every tactical analysis model we have, this is a suicide mission. Chen turned back to her crew, seeing the same grim determination she felt reflected in every face. They had come too far and seen too much to turn back now, regardless of the odds. Options? She asked simply. Colonel Martinez, the Marine commander, stepped forward from where he had been studying the tactical displays. His weathered face bore the scars of a dozen conflicts, and his eyes held the hard gleam of a professional soldier. Ma'am, direct confrontation is indeed suicide, but we're not bound by Federation tactical doctrine. Human military theory emphasizes speed, surprise, and concentration of force. If we can separate their fleet and engage them in smaller groups, our technological advantages might level the playing field. Explain. Martinez gestured to the holographic display showing the enemy fleet's deployment. They're spread out across multiple orbital zones to maximize bombardment coverage. That gives us opportunity. Human vessels are faster and more maneuverable than most alien designs. We could use hit and run tactics to draw portions of their fleet away from the planet, then engage them with concentrated firepower. Commander Nakamura nodded slowly. The Colonel's right about our speed advantage. The Defiants can outrun anything they've got, and our kinetic weapons have better penetration than most species realize. The problem is staying power. We can't afford a prolonged engagement. Chen studied the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. The enemy fleet was indeed dispersed, with several vessels conducting close orbital bombardment, while others maintained wider perimeter patrols. It was a deployment pattern that made sense for genocide, but left them vulnerable to a coordinated attack. What about the civilian evacuation situation? Rodriguez pulled up communication intercepts and sensor data. Most Volani population centers have been destroyed or are under direct attack, but we're detecting large groups of survivors in the underground archaeological complexes. The Zephyrian ruins apparently extend deep into the planetary crust, providing natural bomb shelters. How many? Best estimate is around 30,000 survivors, scattered across multiple sites. The largest concentration appears to be at the Primary Archaeological Institute, where roughly 8,000 Volani are sheltering in the deep excavation tunnels. Chen made her decision. The tactical situation was impossible. The political ramifications were potentially catastrophic, and they were outnumbered 12-1 by forces that outgunned them in every category. By any rational analysis, they should withdraw immediately and wait for proper Federation reinforcements. But rationality had never been humanity's strongest trait when innocent lives were at stake. "This is what we're going to do," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of absolute command. "The Prosperity will break off and head for the primary survivor concentration. She's got the cargo capacity to evacuate significant numbers if we can clear her a path to the surface." "Captain," interrupted the voice of Captain Elena Vasquez from the converted merchant vessel, her transmission crackling through the fleet communication channel. "Prosperity's not equipped for combat operations. If we go in alone, you won't be alone," Chen assured her. "The Valkyrie and Thor will provide escort and cover your approach. Meanwhile, the Defiants will engage the main enemy force and draw their attention away from the planetary surface." Colonel Martinez stepped closer to the display. "Ma'am, if I might suggest a modification to the plan. My Marines are equipped for rapid insertion operations. If we can get close enough to the planet, we could deploy directly to the survivor sites and coordinate evacuation from the ground." The idea was audacious even by human standards. Combat drops onto a hostile world while orbital bombardment continued overhead violated every principle of safe military operation. It was exactly the kind of reckless courage that other species found both admirable and terrifying about humans. "Do it," Chen decided. "Prepare for immediate deployment. We'll use the asteroid belt to mask our approach, then split up for simultaneous operations." As her crew began implementing the plan, Chen opened a private channel to Admiral Morrison back on Earth. The time delay for communication meant she would be recording a message rather than having a conversation, but protocol demanded that Fleet Command be informed of major tactical decisions. "Admiral, this is Chen reporting from Kepler, 442. The situation is worse than we anticipated. We're facing a coordinated genocide operation conducted by hegemony remnant forces. Estimated enemy strength is 12 combat vessels with superior firepower and defensive systems." She paused, looking out at the burning world that had become the focal point of humanity's first major galactic intervention. "I'm implementing immediate rescue operations despite overwhelming tactical disadvantage. If this goes badly, I want the record to show that this was my decision alone, made in accordance with human values and the moral imperative to protect innocent life. Chin out. The transmission burst toward Earth at light speed, carrying news that would either herald humanity's emergence as a true galactic power or mark the beginning of their exile from civilized space. All stations implement Plan Alpha, Chun ordered. Prosperity, begin your approach to the evacuation zone. Valkyrie and Thor take flanking positions and prepare for combat escort duty. Defiance will engage the enemy main force in 30 minutes. As the human fleet split apart and began their desperate gambit, Chun found herself thinking about the broader implications of what they were attempting. Every species in the galaxy knew the statistics about Death-world civilizations. Less than 1% of sapient species evolved under conditions as hostile as those found on Earth, and most of those that did either destroyed themselves through warfare or developed such aggressive tendencies that they were quarantined by the galactic community. Humans have been different, managing to channel their violent instincts toward exploration and protection rather than conquest. But that distinction was often lost on species whose worst predators were equivalent to Earth's house cats, and whose idea of environmental challenge was a light rainstorm. Now, as they prepared to demonstrate exactly why Death-world species were feared throughout the galaxy, Chen hoped that observers would remember that humans had chosen to use their terrible capabilities in defense of those who could not defend themselves. The Defiance began her final approach toward the enemy fleet, her crew working with the calm efficiency of professionals who knew they might not survive the next few hours. In engineering, Chief Petty Officer Thompson pushed the fusion reactors beyond their rated capacity, coaxing extra power from systems that were already operating at their theoretical limits. In the weapons bays, ordnance specialists loaded the kinetic cannons with uranium core penetrators designed to punch through the most advanced alien armor. Most importantly, in the Marine Bay, 200 of humanity's finest soldiers made final preparations for what might be the most important combat drop in their species' history. They checked weapons, verified communication systems, and performed the 1,000 small rituals that warriors had used to prepare for battle since the dawn of time. Enemy fleet has detected our approach, reported Singh from Tactical. They're moving to intercept. Chun watched the display as alien warships began altering course to engage the small human force. The Crothery heavy cruiser was turning to present its main weapon batteries, while smaller escort vessels moved to flanking positions. It was a textbook response to an inferior force, designed to ensure complete destruction of the attackers. Time to show them why you don't corner a Death-world species, Chen muttered, settling back into her command chair. The Battle of Kepler, 442, was about to begin, and, with it, humanity's true introduction to galactic warfare. The outcome would determine not just the fate of 30,000 Volani survivors, but the future relationship between Earth and the rest of civilized space. The first exchange of fire lit up space with the deadly beauty of high-energy warfare. The Crothery heavy cruiser opened with a full broadside of plasma cannons, brilliant streams of superheated matter that would have vaporized any conventional Federation vessel. But the Defiance was far from conventional. Evasive maneuvers, Chun commanded, and her helmsman threw the battlecruiser into a spiraling dive that would have liquefied the crew of any other species. Humans, however, had evolved under 3 times standard galactic gravity and possessed an inner ear structure that allowed them to function under accelerations that left most aliens unconscious. The plasma bursts passed harmlessly through space where the Defiance had been moments before, while the human ship's return fire struck the Crothery vessel with devastating precision. Uranium core kinetic rounds, accelerated to significant fractions of light speed, punched through energy shields and armor plating that had been designed to stop conventional energy weapons. Direct hits on the enemy cruiser, Singh reported from Tactical. Their forward shield generators are down, and we've got secondary explosions across their main hull. The alien fleet reacted with shock surprise to the effectiveness of human weapons. Crothery military doctrine was built around the assumption that overwhelming firepower and superior technology would crush any opposition before it could mount an effective response. They had never faced an enemy that could absorb massive damage and continue fighting, or one that preferred kinetic weapons over the energy systems that dominated galactic warfare. "Multiple enemy vessels closing on our position," warned Lieutenant Rodriguez. "I'm reading weapons locked from at least 6 different ships." Shin smiled grimly. The enemy was doing exactly what she wanted, concentrating their forces on the Defiance while the rescue operation proceeded on the planet below. Every moment they spent trying to destroy her ship was a moment when Volani civilians could be evacuated to safety. Continue evasive maneuvers and return fire. Make them work for every shot. The next few minutes became a deadly dance through three-dimensional space as the Defiance wove between enemy vessels, her superior speed and maneuverability allowing her to avoid the worst of their concentrated fire. But even human engineering had its limits, and the battlecruiser's shields were beginning to show strain under the constant bombardment. Meanwhile, far below, the real drama was unfolding as human Marines prepared for their most dangerous mission ever attempted. Colonel Martinez stood in the dropship bay, addressing his troops with the calm professionalism that had made him legendary throughout the human military. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we're about to do has never been attempted by any species in galactic history," he announced over the communication system. "We're going to conduct a combat insertion into a hot landing zone while orbital bombardment is ongoing, then execute a rescue operation in underground complexes that may be structurally compromised." The 200 Marines listened with the focused attention of professionals who understood they were making history. These were volunteers drawn from the best units Earth could field, specialists in everything from zero-gravity combat to xenobiology. More importantly, they were humans who had volunteered for deep space duty specifically because they wanted to prove their species' worth to the galaxy. "The enemy has numerical superiority, better technology, and complete air superiority," Martinez continued. "They also have no idea what they're dealing with. Every species they've faced before follows predictable tactical patterns and breaks when casualties reach acceptable levels. We don't." Through the dropship's viewports, the Marines could see Volani Prime growing larger as they approached the surface. The planet's beauty was still evident despite the devastation, with crystalline formations catching the light of the system's primary star and ancient Zephyrian monuments rising like needles from pristine landscapes. But the scars of war were everywhere. Massive craters marked where population centers had been obliterated, while the glow of ongoing fires painted entire continents in shades of orange and red. Most heartbreaking were the silent ruins of research facilities, their delicate spires shattered and their laboratories reduced to rubble. "Primary Archaeological Institute coming into visual range," reported Sergeant Major Chun, the colonel's senior non-commissioned officer. "Long-range sensors indicate the underground complex is intact, but surface access points are under intermittent bombardment." Martinez nodded, studying the tactical display that showed their landing zone and the surrounding enemy positions. 3 hegemony vessels were maintaining orbital overwatch of the Institute, their weapons trained on anything that moved on the surface. Breaking through that coverage would require every trick in the human tactical manual. "Flight Plan Delta," he ordered. "Use the mountain range for cover and approach from the northwest. Once we're on the ground, Alpha and Bravo companies establish a perimeter while Charlie Company begins evacuation operations." The dropships shuddered as they hit the planet's atmosphere, their heat shields glowing cherry red as atmospheric friction tried to tear them apart. Human engineering had built these craft to survive re-entry under combat conditions, but the stress of high-speed atmospheric insertion still pushed them to their operational limits. Back in space, Captain Shin watched her tactical display as the rescue operation unfolded below. The Prosperity was making her run toward the planet's surface, escorted by the Valkyrie and Thor, while the Defiance continued her deadly game of cat and mouse with the main enemy fleet. "Ma'am, we're receiving communication from the surface," Rodriguez announced. "It's coming from the Archaeological Institute. The Volani survivors are attempting to establish contact." "Put it through," Chun ordered. The main screen flickered, resolving into the image of a Volani researcher whose normally pristine appearance was marred by dust and fear. The alien's large eyes reflected the kind of terror that came from watching one civilization die. But there's also hope as they realized help had finally arrived. Human vessels. This is Research Director Thimal of the Primary Archaeological Institute. The Volani said in heavily accented Standard Galactic. We have 8,000 survivors in the deep excavation chambers, including nearly 2,000 younglings. The surface installations are destroyed, but the underground complex remains intact. Shun leaned forward in her command chair. Director Thimal, this is Captain Shun of the human vessel Defiance. We are here to evacuate your people. My Marines are inbound to your position, and we have transport vessels standing by. The relief on Thimal's face was evident even across species lines. Captain, you cannot know what this means to us. We had given up hope of rescue. The Federation Council declared our system too dangerous for immediate response, and we thought. You thought wrong, Chen interrupted gently. Humans don't abandon civilians to genocide, regardless of the tactical situation. Hold your position and prepare for evacuation. We'll get you out of this. As she spoke, the first human dropships were touching down in the ruins of the Archaeological Institute. The Marines deployed with the smooth efficiency of troops who had trained for exactly this scenario, establishing defensive positions while specialized teams moved toward the underground access points. Colonel Martinez was among the first on the surface, his combat armor automatically adjusting to the planet's environmental conditions, while his tactical display populated with real-time intelligence from orbital sensors. The devastation was even worse up close, with the elegant Volani research facilities reduced to twisted metal and scattered debris. Alpha Company, establish overwatch positions on the high ground. He ordered over the tactical network. Bravo Company, secure the perimeter and watch for enemy ground forces. Charlie Company, with me. The entrance to the underground complex had been partially collapsed by orbital bombardment, but human military engineers had dealt with worse obstacles. Plasma cutters and shaped charges quickly cleared a path large enough for evacuation operations, while overhead the Defiance continued her deadly duel with the enemy fleet. The first sight of the Volani survivors was something none of the Marines would ever forget. Thousands of beings huddled in the ancient excavation chambers, their gossamer clothing torn and dirty, their large eyes reflecting a combination of terror and desperate hope. These were a people who had never known war, whose entire civilization was built around scholarly research and peaceful coexistence. Many of the adult Volani were injured, bearing wounds from falling debris or exposure to toxic smoke. But it was the younglings that broke the hearts of hardened soldiers. Volani children were smaller and even more delicate than the adults, with translucent skin that showed the stress patterns of severe malnutrition and dehydration. Jesus Christ, whispered Corporal Jackson, a veteran of 3 major conflicts who had seen the worst that warfare could inflict. How could anyone target children? Focus on the mission, Martinez reminded his troops, but his own voice was tight with suppressed rage. We're here to get them out, not to judge the enemy. Save the anger for later. The evacuation began immediately, with human medics providing emergency care, while engineers worked to expand the exit routes. The Volani were amazed by the speed and efficiency of human operations, having never witnessed the kind of organized urgency that their rescuers brought to the task. Director Thimal approached Colonel Martinez as the first groups of survivors were being moved toward the dropships. The Volani researcher was clearly exhausted, but maintained the dignity that seemed characteristic of their species. Colonel, I must ask about the surface situation. Are we truly safe? Martinez checked his tactical display, which showed enemy vessels still maintaining orbital overwatch of their position. Not yet, Director. We're evacuating you under fire, and the enemy is going to realize what we're doing soon enough. Once that happens, things are going to get very hot very quickly. As if summoned by his words, proximity alarms began screaming throughout the complex. Overhead, enemy sensors had finally identified the human rescue operation, and hegemony forces were moving to intercept. "All units, prepare for combat," Martinez ordered. "The enemy has found us." The Battle of Volani Prime was about to enter its most critical phase, as 200 human Marines prepared to hold their ground against overwhelming odds while thousands of civilians depended on their courage and skill. In space above, Captain Chun watched the tactical situation develop and made the hardest decision of her military career. "All ships, this is Defiance," she announced over the fleet communication channel. "The enemy is moving to attack our ground forces. I'm taking the ship in for close air support." The implications were staggering. Bringing a battlecruiser into planetary atmosphere for ground support was a maneuver that pushed both ship and crew beyond their design specifications. But as energy bolts began falling around the Archaeological Institute like deadly rain, Chen knew that conventional tactics would not be enough to save the Volani or her Marines. The Defiance turned toward the planet's surface, her fusion drives burning at maximum power as she prepared to demonstrate why Deathworld species were feared throughout the galaxy. Below, two cultures that had never met before were about to witness the lengths to which humans would go to protect innocent life. The descent of the Defiance into Volani Prime's atmosphere was a sight that would become legendary throughout the galaxy. The massive battlecruiser screamed through the upper atmosphere like a falling star, her hull glowing white-hot from atmospheric friction while her point defense systems engaged incoming enemy fire. No ship of her class had ever attempted such a maneuver, and by every engineering standard it should have been impossible. But human engineering had always been built around impossible scenarios and desperate circumstances. "Hull temperature approaching critical limits," reported Chief Engineer Thompson from deep within the ship's bowels. "Atmospheric entry at this speed is causing stress fractures throughout the secondary hull sections." "Can she hold together?" Chun asked, gripping her command chair as the ship bucked and rolled through atmospheric turbulence that threatened to tear her apart. "She's a tough old bird, Captain. Human ships are built to take punishment and keep fighting. But we're pushing into uncharted territory here." On the surface below, Colonel Martinez watched the Defiance's approach with a mixture of awe and professional concern. The battlecruiser was essentially conducting a controlled crash into the planet's atmosphere while maintaining full combat capability, a feat that required not just courage, but almost superhuman skill from her crew. "All Marines, take cover," he ordered as the first enemy orbital bombardment began falling around their position. "Air support is inbound." The hegemony forces had finally realized that a rescue operation was underway and were moving to crush it with overwhelming firepower. 3 destroyer-class vessels had broken off from the main fleet and were converging on the Archaeological Institute, their weapons systems charging for a bombardment that would obliterate everything within a 50-kilometer radius. That was when the Defiance opened fire from atmospheric entry trajectory. The sight of a battlecruiser engaging enemy vessels while falling through a planet's atmosphere at hypersonic speeds was something no tactical manual had ever described. Chen's gunners had perhaps 30 seconds of firing opportunity before the ship would be forced to pull up or crash into the surface. But they made those seconds count. Kinetic rounds accelerated by both the ship's weapons, and her atmospheric velocity struck the leading enemy destroyer with the force of meteors. The alien vessel's shields flared and died under impacts that registered as small-scale seismic events, while secondary explosions rippled along her hull as critical systems overloaded and failed. "Direct hit on enemy destroyer," Singh reported, his voice tight with concentration as he worked to maintain targeting solutions under impossible conditions. "She's breaking up and falling out of orbit." The other 2 enemy vessels immediately turned their attention from the ground targets to the incoming human battlecruiser, recognizing the greater threat. But their commanding officers had made a critical error in tactical assessment. They assumed the Defiance would be forced to maintain a predictable trajectory during her atmospheric approach. They had never dealt with humans before. "Emergency pull-up maneuver," Chun ordered, and her helmsman threw the ship into a gravity-defying climb that subjected every person aboard to forces that would have killed most alien species. The Defiant screamed back towards space, her fusion drives howling at maximum power while her hull groaned under stresses that exceeded all design specifications. The enemy plasma bolts that should have intercepted her passage through atmosphere instead struck empty air, while the human ship disappeared back into the safety of orbital space faster than their targeting computers could track. "Ma'am, we've lost atmospheric heating on hull sections 7 through 12, Thompson reported. But structural integrity is holding, and all major systems are operational." Chun allowed herself a moment of savage satisfaction. In less than 2 minutes, they had destroyed one enemy vessel and demonstrated a tactical capability that no other species possessed. More importantly, they had bought precious time for the evacuation operation on the surface. Colonel Martinez wasted no opportunity. As soon as the immediate orbital bombardment threat was neutralized, he accelerated the rescue operations beyond all established protocols. Human efficiency was legendary throughout the military, but what his Marines accomplished in the next hour surpassed anything they had achieved before. Charlie Company established medical triage stations at evacuation points 3 and 4. He ordered over the tactical network. Delta Company expand the access tunnels and get heavy equipment down here. We need to evacuate 8,000 beings in the next 6 hours before the enemy brings in reinforcements. The underground complex became a carefully controlled chaos of rescue operations as human soldiers worked alongside Volani survivors to save as many lives as possible. What amazed the aliens was not just the efficiency of human operations, but the genuine care and compassion their rescuers showed for beings they had never encountered before. Corporal Sarah Kim, a medic with the 3rd Marine Regiment, found herself treating a young Volani child whose parents had been killed in the initial bombardment. The youngster was terrified and badly injured, unable to communicate in standard galactic, and clearly traumatized by the destruction of everything familiar. "Hey there, little one," Kim said softly, her voice gentle despite the combat gear and weapons that marked her as a warrior. "I know you're scared, but you're safe now. We're going to get you out of here." The Volani child couldn't understand her words, but the tone and body language transcended species barriers. As Kim worked to treat the youngster's injuries with medical supplies designed for human physiology, other Volani survivors watched in amazement at the care she showed for a being that was completely alien to her. Similar scenes were playing out throughout the complex as human soldiers shared their rations with hungry Volani civilians, used their engineering equipment to provide clean water and sanitation, and offered comfort to beings who had lost everything they valued in life. The cultural barrier was immense, but compassion and courage needed no translation. Director Thimal approached Colonel Martinez as the first major group of evacuees was being loaded onto the waiting dropships. The Volani researcher's formal manner had been replaced by something approaching wonder as he observed human rescue operations. "Colonel, I must confess that my people knew little about humans beyond the official Federation reports. We had heard about your species being classified as Deathworld adapted, and, frankly, many of us found the implications disturbing." Martinez checked his tactical display, noting that enemy reinforcements were beginning to arrive in the outer system. They had perhaps 3 hours before the rescue operation would become impossible to continue. "Director, I understand your concerns. Most species react that way when they learn about Earth's environmental conditions and human evolutionary history. We're aware that we make other civilizations nervous. But that is exactly what I find so remarkable," Thimal continued. "Your warriors are clearly capable of violence beyond anything my people could imagine, yet they show such gentle care for our younglings. Your ships can survive damage that would destroy any vessel in our fleet, yet you risk them without hesitation to save beings you have never met." The Volani researcher paused, his large eyes reflecting a dawning understanding that would reshape his species' perspective on humanity. "We were taught that Deathworld species were dangerous because they were inherently aggressive and unpredictable. But perhaps we misunderstood the true nature of that danger. You are not dangerous because you seek to harm others. You are dangerous to those who would harm the innocent. Before Martinez could respond, proximity alarms began screaming throughout the complex. His tactical display lit up with threat indicators as a new wave of enemy vessels dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. "All units, prepare for immediate evacuation," he ordered. "The cavalry has arrived, and we're about to be seriously outnumbered." In space above, Captain Chen watched the tactical situation develop with growing concern. The original enemy fleet had been reinforced by at least 20 additional vessels, including several heavy cruisers and what appeared to be a Dreadnought-class command ship. Even with human technological advantages, the numbers were becoming overwhelming. "Captain, we're receiving a priority transmission from the lead enemy vessel," Rodriguez reported. "They're demanding we surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded." Chen's expression hardened. "Open a channel. Let's hear what they have to say." The main screen flickered, resolving into the image of a Crothery fleet commander whose scarred features and ceremonial armor marked him as a veteran of the Hegemony War. Behind him, Chun could see the bridge of a massive warship bristling with weapons and crewed by multiple alien species united in their hatred for the Federation. "Human Captain," the Crothery commander spoke in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "I am Fleet Commander Vractal of the True Hegemony. You will immediately cease your interference in our cleansing operation and prepare to surrender your vessels." "Not going to happen," Chun replied without hesitation. "We're conducting humanitarian rescue operations under Federation emergency protocols. Any interference with those operations constitutes an act of war." Vractal's laugh was a harsh sound that spoke to generations of accumulated hatred and resentment. "War? Child, you command 4 primitive vessels against a battle fleet. Your technology is crude, your crew is untested, and your tactics are predictable. You will surrender now, or we will demonstrate why Deathworld species are not permitted to possess military technology." Chun stood from her command chair, her posture conveying the kind of quiet confidence that had made her species the apex predators of Earth. "Fleet Commander, you've made one critical error in your tactical assessment. You assume that being outnumbered is the same as being defeated. Let me explain something about humans that apparently wasn't covered in your intelligence briefings." She paused, looking directly into the alien commander's eyes with the kind of steady gaze that predators use to evaluate threats. "We evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill us. Our environment, our weather, our wildlife, everything was a constant threat that required constant adaptation and innovation. Most species development peaceful cooperation as their primary survival strategy. We developed the ability to fight anything, anywhere, under any conditions." The bridge of the Defiance had fallen completely silent as Chun delivered what would become known throughout the galaxy as the Death World Declaration. "You have 30 minutes to withdraw from this system and cease hostilities against Villani civilians. If you refuse, you're going to learn firsthand why the galaxy fears Death World species. And, Commander, when you're filing your after-action report, assuming you survive to file one, remember that humans always fight hardest when we're protecting something precious." The transmission cut to static as Chun severed the connection, leaving the bridge crew to contemplate what they had just committed themselves to accomplishing. Around them, space itself seemed to hold its breath as 2 fundamentally different approaches to warfare prepared to clash in the darkness between worlds. The real battle was about to begin. The final battle of Kepler 442 began 31 minutes later when Fleet Commander Vractal's patience finally ran out. The Hegemony forces had spent the grace period repositioning for what they assumed would be a quick and decisive engagement against an inferior opponent. They had calculated human capabilities based on standard Federation tactical models and reached the conclusion that overwhelming firepower would end the conflict within minutes. They had never been more wrong about anything in their military careers. The opening exchange demonstrated the fundamental difference between Federation warfare and the kind of conflict that humans had perfected during their violent climb to the top of Earth's food chain. While Vractal's fleet approached in the standard battle line formation that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia, the human vessels scattered into what appeared to be a chaotic and undisciplined deployment. Enemy fleet is maintaining predictable formation and approach vectors, reported Commander Nakamura from his tactical station. They're following standard hegemony doctrine, which means they'll concentrate fire on the largest threat and work their way down. Captain Shin nodded, watching the tactical display as 24 enemy vessels bore down on her tiny fleet with overwhelming superiority in numbers, firepower, and defensive systems. By every conventional measure, the battle was already over before it had begun. But humans had never been particularly concerned with conventional measures. "Implement the Terran Gambit," she ordered calmly. "All ships break formation and engage independently. Remember, we're not trying to win a conventional battle. We're trying to buy time for the evacuation." The Terran Gambit was a tactical doctrine that had been developed during Earth's most desperate conflicts, refined through centuries of warfare against seemingly impossible odds. It abandoned traditional concepts of formation, fighting in favor of what alien military theorists would later describe as organized chaos, a combat system that relied on individual initiative, superior training, and the human capacity to function under extreme stress. The Defiance suddenly accelerated to her maximum velocity and dove directly toward the center of the enemy formation, her weapons blazing as she closed to point-blank range with the lead hegemony vessels. Before the aliens could react to this suicidal attack, the human battlecruiser had punched through their formation and emerged on the far side, having inflicted catastrophic damage on 3 ships while absorbing surprisingly little in return. Simultaneously, the Valkyrie and Thor split off in different directions, using their superior speed and maneuverability to engage enemy vessels from unexpected angles. The converted merchant ship Prosperity continued her evacuation run to the planet's surface, protected by the chaos that the warships were creating throughout the enemy formation. "What are they doing?" Vraktal demanded from his command bridge, watching in bewilderment as the human vessels refused to fight according to any recognizable tactical doctrine. "Their formation is completely broken. They should be concentrating their firepower." His tactical officer, a veteran Crothry warrior who had served throughout the Hegemony War, studied the sensor displays with growing concern. "Sir, I don't think they're fighting a conventional battle. Look at their target selection. They're not trying to destroy our ships. They're trying to disable our weapons and mobility systems." As if to confirm his analysis, the Defiance swept past another enemy cruiser, her kinetic weapons precisely targeting the alien vessel's weapon mounts and engine pods rather than going for the quick kill shots that would normally end such an engagement. The cruiser was left spinning helplessly in space, alive but completely unable to contribute to the battle. "They're using our own numbers against us," the tactical officer continued, his voice reflecting a dawning respect for human tactical innovation. "Every ship we have that's disabled becomes an obstacle that limits our maneuverability and fields of fire." What the hegemony forces were witnessing was the practical application of human military philosophy developed through countless conflicts on a world where survival often meant defeating multiple opponents simultaneously. Rather than seeking decisive engagements, humans had learned to create confusion, exploit momentary advantages, and turn enemy strengths into weaknesses. On the surface of Volani Prime, Colonel Martinez watched the space battle through his tactical display while coordinating the final phases of the evacuation. His Marines had loaded nearly 6,000 Volani survivors onto transport ships, but 2,000 more remained in the underground complex, including many who were too injured to be moved quickly. "Prosperity is making her final approach," reported Sergeant Major Chun. "But she's taking fire from those enemy destroyers maintaining low orbit." Martinez checked his chronometer. The space battle had been raging for 43 minutes, and while the humans were performing far better than anyone had expected, they couldn't maintain this level of intensity indefinitely. Simple mathematics dictated that eventually superior numbers would tell. "All companies expedite evacuation procedures," he ordered. "We need everyone loaded and ready for departure in the next 20 minutes, or we're going to be stranded down here." The Marines responded with the kind of desperate efficiency that characterized human operations under extreme pressure. Wounded Villani were carried to the transport ships, while engineering teams worked frantically to expand access routes and clear debris from the underground complex. Most remarkably, human soldiers began volunteering to remain behind to ensure that the last Villani civilians could escape. It was a gesture that stunned the alien survivors, who couldn't comprehend why beings they had never met would sacrifice themselves for strangers. Director Thimal approached Martinez as the colonel supervised the loading of the most seriously injured survivors. The Villani researcher's normally composed demeanor had been replaced by something approaching awe as he watched human soldiers risk everything for people they had no obligation to save. "Colonel, I must ask you something that has been troubling me since your arrival. Why are you doing this? Your species gains nothing from rescuing us. Indeed, you risk everything: your ships, your lives, your standing with the Federation." Martinez paused in his coordination duties, looking up at the alien researcher with the kind of steady gaze that had characterized human leaders throughout history. "Director, there's something you need to understand about humans. We don't help people because of what we gain from it. We help because it's the right thing to do. But surely there must be strategic considerations, political calculations." "No," Martinez interrupted gently. "Sometimes it really is that simple. Your civilians under attack by military forces, and you can't defend yourselves. That makes you our responsibility, regardless of species or politics or anything else." Before Thimal could respond, proximity alarms began screaming throughout the complex. Martinez's tactical display showed that the space battle had taken a turn for the worse. Several human vessels were showing critical damage, and enemy reinforcements were continuing to arrive in the outer system. "All units, prepare for emergency evacuation," he ordered. "We got maybe 10 minutes before this whole operation becomes impossible." In space above, Captain Chun was discovering the limits of human tactical innovation. The Defiance had taken significant damage during her repeated runs through the enemy formation, and her crew was beginning to show the strain of combat operations that had pushed them far beyond normal human endurance. "Hull breaches on decks 7 and 11, reported Chief Engineer Thompson. "Fire suppression systems are containing the damage, but we're losing structural integrity throughout the forward sections." "Casualties?" Chen asked, though she dreaded the answer. 17 dead, 43 wounded. Medical is handling the injured, but we're running low on everything from ammunition to medical supplies." Chun studied the tactical display, noting that they had managed to disable or destroy nearly half the enemy fleet through their unconventional tactics. But the cost had been enormous, and the remaining hegemony vessels were beginning to adapt to human fighting methods. "Captain," called Lieutenant Rodriguez from communications, "I'm receiving a priority transmission from Prosperity. They're requesting immediate assistance. Enemy forces are moving to intercept their evacuation run." The moment of final decision had arrived. Chun could order the Defiance to disengage and preserve what remained of her fleet, accepting that some Villani civilians would have to be abandoned. It was the rational choice, the decision that any competent commander would make when faced with impossible odds. But Chun was human, and humans had never been particularly rational when innocent lives were at stake. "All vessels, converge on Prosperity's position," she ordered. "We're going to cover that evacuation if we have to ram every enemy ship in the system." What followed was 10 minutes of the most intense combat in galactic history as the surviving human vessels threw themselves between the enemy fleet and the evacuation ships with a fury that shocked both sides of the conflict. The Defiance, her hull glowing from multiple hits and her weapons firing until they reached thermal overload, led a charge that would become legendary throughout human space. The Valkyrie and Thor, both critically damaged but still fighting, flanked the battlecruiser as she bore down on the enemy forces threatening the civilian evacuation. Their weapons blazed continuously, kinetic rounds and energy beams creating a wall of destruction that carved through enemy formations like a blade through tissue. Fleet Commander Vractal watched this final assault with something approaching disbelief. His tactical computers were reporting that the human vessels should have been destroyed or disabled long ago, yet they continued fighting with a ferocity that defied all military logic. "Sir, the human flagship is on a collision course with our position," his tactical officer reported. "She's taken critical damage, but shows no signs of altering course." Vractal stared at the approaching battlecruiser, noting the battle damage that scored her hull, and the way she listed slightly to port from internal structural failures. By every rational measure, the ship should have surrendered or withdrawn minutes ago. "All ships, concentrate fire on the human flagship," he ordered. "Destroy her before she can reach us." The concentrated firepower of 8 hegemony vessels struck the Defiance with devastating force, overloading her shields and tearing through her armor like paper. But even as secondary explosions rippled along her hull and atmosphere vented from dozens of breaches, the human ship continued her approach. It was then that Vractal realized what he was witnessing. The humans weren't retreating because they couldn't retreat. They wouldn't abandon their rescue operation because their moral code wouldn't permit it. They would fight until their ships were destroyed and their crews were dead because that was what their species did when protecting the innocent. "All ships, cease fire," he ordered quietly. His tactical officer looked at him in shock. "Sir, we haven't beaten. One more concentrated barrage will—" "I said cease fire," Vractal repeated, his voice carrying a weight that silenced any further objections. "Signal the fleet to withdraw to minimum safe distance." As the hegemony forces pulled back, the battered human fleet limped toward the planet's surface where the last of the Volani survivors were being loaded onto evacuation ships. The Defiance was barely holding together, her crew working frantically to maintain life support and basic systems, but she had accomplished her mission. All 8,000 Volani civilians had been successfully evacuated. The aftermath of the Battle of Kepler 442 would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. News of the human intervention spread throughout Federation space within days, carried by Volani survivors who spoke of the courage and compassion shown by a species that most of the galaxy had written off as dangerous primitives. Director Thimel's testimony before the Federation Council became the foundation for a new understanding of what it meant to be a Death World species. Yes, humans were capable of violence beyond anything most civilizations could imagine. But they were also capable of self-sacrifice and moral courage that put the galaxy's more civilized species to shame. The political ramifications were immediate and far-reaching. Species that had opposed human integration into the Federation found themselves facing uncomfortable questions about their own willingness to help those in need. The image of human soldiers sharing their rations with alien children became a symbol that transcended cultural and biological barriers. Perhaps most importantly, the Battle of Kepler 442 established humanity's reputation as a species that could be trusted with military power because they used it to protect rather than to conquer. The galaxy had feared Death World species because of their capacity for violence, but humans had demonstrated that true strength lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to know when destruction was justified. As Captain Chen stood on the bridge of the damaged but victorious Defiance, watching the evacuation ships carry Volani survivors to safety, she reflected on what they had accomplished. They had saved 50,000 innocent lives, prevented a genocide, and proved that humanity deserved its place among the stars. More than that, they had shown the galaxy that being born on a death world didn't make a species dangerous to civilization. It made them dangerous to those who would threaten civilization. The distinction would reshape galactic politics for centuries to come, as other species began to understand that humans were not conquerors to be feared, but guardians to be respected. The age of human isolation was over. The age of human leadership had begun.